And we're going to have to be pure and direct and strong if we're going to survive them. Now you and this cesspool you call a television station, and your people who wallow around in it, and your viewers who watch you do it, are rotting us away from the inside. We intend to stop that rot.
We're going to start with Channel 83, Max.
Set of TV, the one you take to bed with you.
The television screen is the retina of the mind's eye. Therefore, the television screen is part of the physical structure of the brain. Therefore, whatever appears on the television screen emerges as raw experience for those who watch it. Therefore, television is reality, and reality is less than television.
In an attempt to defend yourself against things that are threatening, you absorb them, you embrace them, and you make a film about them. That's one of the ways of doing that. And yes, that's my trick.
I think he's not afraid to back away from anything. He'll show you anything. The guy will not stop. If it's there, and if it's part of the story, you will see it.
If violent imagery really did provoke violence, then everyone would be violent, because we are constantly bombarded by violent imagery of one kind or another.
Cronenberg is 20th century, late 20th century. You know, Cronenberg is something that we unfortunately have no control over.
You often find the belief that an image can kill. I mean, literally. I mean, it's almost like scanners. You know, thoughts can kill, images can kill.
I've always found his films extremely unpleasant, distasteful, and kind of negative, totally negative.
As an artist, one is bound to explore every aspect of human experience. The darkest corners, not necessarily, but if that is where one is led, that's where one must go.
Long live the new flesh.
The Steinbeck Institute for Media Research in Northern Ontario was founded in 1976 by psychologist and cineast Dr. Martin Steinbeck to monitor the impact of visual media on our central nervous systems. It is here that data is being processed on Canadian horror filmmaker David Cronenberg. Over the last 17 years, Cronenberg has written and directed a number of films which possess a shocking force and powerful vision. Characterized by their violence, visceral explicitness, and twisted sexual aggression, the films also demonstrate a thematic complexity and consistency and a philosophical concern for the human condition. The following data has, until recently, been classified restricted, Category D.
The phrase biological horror really refers to the fact that my films are very body conscious. They're very conscious of physical existence as a living organism. And rather than other horror films or science fiction films, which are very technologically oriented or are concerned with the supernatural, and in that sense are very disembodied.
Oh my God!
I've never been religious in the sense that I felt that there was a God, that there was an external structure, universal, cosmic, that was imposed upon human beings. I really did always feel, at first not particularly consciously and then quite consciously, that we have created our own universe, and therefore what is wrong with it also comes from us. My worldview is human-centered as opposed to centered outside of humanity. I think that naturally leads you to the feeling that if you're dealing with horror, then it must also be human-centered. It comes from men. the idea that you carry the seeds of your own destruction around with you always, and that they can erupt at any time, is scarier, because there is no defense against it. There is no escape from it, and I find it scary.
The thing about Cronenberg's work that fascinates me is this kind of sociological breakdown of order that you see in movies like Rabid, and I guess probably the best one is They Came From Within.
So this is really perverse. I said, this is really going to be, this is quite something. And of course, what goes on in that condominium and the symbolism of that, and for example, the shot of the little girl kissing the old man. I believe is a shot which goes, I believe, in slow motion. And those images are absolutely terrifying and shocking, and something that is a nerve he's touching that you don't want to be bothered with. You don't want to have touched. And yet it was very brave and quite remarkable and quite revealing. And I thought it was very depressing because of that. Very depressing to make me think of things I didn't want to think about.
People are afraid of the dark. People are afraid of falling. People are afraid of bugs. Whatever it is, you simply fix on that, and then you drill it. So that's what I mean. Find out something that's bad and make it worse. Does that make any sense?
People have often said to me, why not do it the way Hitchcock did and be, just suggest things. And of course, first of all, I say, have you ever seen Frenzy? Because I think that Hitchcock's reticence to show stuff really had more to do with the temper of the times and the censorship of the times than it did with his own demons. But I think that I have to show things because I'm showing things that people could not imagine. So I'm presenting them with imagery and with possibilities that have to be shown. There is no other way to do it. It's really a question of imagery and conceptual imagery. It's not just, let's show someone killing a pig on screen and we'll get a good reaction. Well, you would, but so what?
Well, I think he's not afraid to back away from anything. He'll show you anything. The guy will not stop. If it's there, and if it's part of the story, you will see it. He's unsparing in his depiction of detail. At the same time, he does have compassion. David has been accused of being a cold director, manipulative director, and it's simply not the truth. Anybody who's seen The Brood knows that he has strong human feelings. Anybody who's seen The Dead Zone knows that. And so the two things complement each other. It's like the warm and the cold mixing in some funny way to make something that's entirely new. He's very talented, and he's also bright, and it doesn't hurt a director to be bright. They aren't all.
The Mazda RX-7.
many of the peaks of philosophical thought revolve around the impossible duality that men seem to live with, which is mind and body. Whether the mind aspect is expressed as soul or spirit or whatever, but it's still, it's the old Cartesian absolute split between the two. There seems to be a point at which they should fuse, and it should be very apparent to everyone, and it's not. It really isn't. And I think that is one of the bases of horror in general, and difficulty in life in particular, that we cannot comprehend how we can die, to be very specific. How can we, why should we die? Why should a healthy mind die just because a body is not healthy? How do you have a man dying a complete physical wreck and his mind is absolutely sharp and clear? There seems to be something wrong with that.
You're changing, Seth. Everything about you is changing. You look bad. You smell bad.
Never been much of a bather.
Those weird hairs that were growing out of your back, I took them to a lab. I had them analyzed. Look. Now there's more. Look at your face. Something happened when you went through, Seth. You've got to get some help. I think you must be sick.
You're jealous! I've become free. I've been released, and you can't stand it. You'll do anything to bring me down. Look at me. Does this look sick? Does this look like a sick man to you?
No! Stop it!
You know any sick men who can do that?
I don't think just by force of will or philosophy that we can reach a stage where we are completely integrated. I think that is something that has to happen physically as well. That would make sense. The mind and the body are totally interlinked as far as I'm concerned. And therefore, for the mind to change and to understand more, the body would have to change as well. To look at the process of aging, for example, and dying as a transformation, which is something that I deal with in The Fly specifically, despite the difficulty. It's necessary to be tough, though. You know, you look at it, it's ugly, it's nasty, it's not pretty. It's very hard to alter our aesthetic sense to accommodate aging, never mind disease. There is an impulse to try to do that, to accommodate aging into our aesthetic, for example. And I think that to extend that a little bit, you would do the same for disease, you know. That's a fine-looking, cancer-ridden young man. It's hard, it's very difficult, and you may say, well, why bother? Well, it's because the man still exists. He has to look at himself.
It seems to me that they have something to do with, and I got this phrase from another review, externalizing rage, where the rage is so strong that it comes out on the body in these different forms that are like horrors of a hospital, horrors of the modern medicine, in a sense, where the body is just erupting with rage and finding its outlet in new medications, in a sense, which are perverse and distorting. And it's just a reflection of it here.
Are you ready for me, Frank? Are you really? I'm in the middle of a strange adventure.
Let me be with you. I want to go with you wherever you go.
Do you? Do you?
Yes.
Then look!
Quality Records invites you to come with us.
Question is always, are these cannibals? No, they are not cannibals. Cannibalism in the true sense of the word implies an interspecies activity. These creatures cannot be considered human. They prey on humans. They do not prey on each other. That's the difference. They attack and they
central structure of the horror film has, at least until recently, been the struggle between the forces of normality and the monster, with the monster representing everything that so-called normality represses. Our own idea of normality, the kind of normality operating in our culture being extremely repressive, by which reading, of course, the monster traditionally becomes the real hero of the horror film, the center of sympathy, although at the same time this can never quite be openly acknowledged. The monster also has to be designated evil. This is the kind of basic given of the genre. So that you have this continual ambivalence in the horror film about the monster, which is sort of terrifying, horrific, and so on, but at the same time, what the film is really about, and what the audience is expected to be fascinated by.
It's been the most trustworthy genre, but in a sense, it's always been there. The first motion picture ever made was a horror picture. It was Edison's Frankenstein, where a guy put something like baking powder all over his face and played the creature. But it's successful for the reason the genre has always been successful. People are scared. And I think people are more frightened today than they ever have been, because there's this constant flood of information. So we have more and more things that we know about, hence more and more things to be frightened about. Everything from Muammar Gaddafi to AIDS. Some people would say there's a similarity between the two. And you can't go around and spend your whole life saying, I'm afraid somebody's going to blow a hole in an airplane. So maybe you find someplace else to put your fear. It's just like a nightmare that you have when you're awake, and then it goes away.
Daddy?
Oh, Candy. What's the matter, sweetheart? Why aren't you sleeping?
I had a bad dream. A scary bad dream.
What was the dream about, honey?
I'm afraid to tell you.
Why?
The dream doesn't want me to.
Can't hurt you now. It's all right now, baby. It's all right.
A virus is only doing its job, you know. It's only trying to live its life. The fact that it's destroying you by doing it is really not, it's not its fault, you know. So I think it's trying to understand the interrelationship amongst organisms, even those that we perceive as disease, and to understand it from the disease's point of view. Of course, it's just a matter of life. It has nothing to do with disease at all. I think most diseases would be very shocked to be considered diseases at all, you know, that it's a very negative connotation. For them, it's very positive when they take over your body and destroy you. It's a triumph.
You got man, right? And you got parasites that live in, on, and around them, right? So, why not breed a parasite that can do something useful? Huh? A parasite that can take over the function of a human organ. For example, you breed a parasite that you implant in the human body cavity, and it hooks into the circulatory system, and it filters the blood just like a kidney does. And so it takes a little blood for itself once in a while. What do you care? I mean, you got enough, you can afford to be generous. Huh? Are you following me?
Oh, no, I am.
Look, Saint, listen, look. You got a guy with a bad kidney, right? Now, you put the bug in it. The bug goes to work on the kidney, dissolves it, then the body assimilates it. Now, what do you got? You got a perfectly good parasite where you used to have a rotten kidney. Right? I know what you're going to say. You're going to say it's crazy.
I think it's crazy.
It's crazy. But who cares?
The strength of the middle class is that it's like a giant amoeba. It can absorb anything. What seems radical and threatening to it, the way that it defends itself is not to put a shell around that can be cracked and broken, but just to absorb whatever it is and assimilate it.
I believe that the growth in my head, this head, this one, right here, I think that it is not really a tumor. Not an uncontrolled, undirected little bubbling pot of flesh, but that it is, in fact, a new organ, a new part of the brain. I think that massive doses of videodrome signal will ultimately create a new outgrowth of the human brain, which will produce and control hallucination to the point that it will change human reality. After all, there is nothing real outside our perception of reality, is there? You can see that, can't you?
That's why it seems very natural for me to be sympathetic to disease, you know. That doesn't mean that I want to get any, but that's one of the reasons that I try to deal with that, is because I know it's inevitable that I will get some.
Roger, I had a very disturbing dream last night. In this dream, I found myself making love to a strange man. He's old and dying. And he smells bad, and I find him repulsive. But then he tells me that everything is erotic, that everything is sexual. He tells me that even old flesh is erotic flesh. That disease is the love of two alien kinds of creatures for each other. That even dying is an act of eroticism. That even to physically exist is sexual. And I believe him. And we make love beautifully.
I had read Norman O. Brown, Life Against Death, and that kind of thing, in which, you know, he would discuss the Freudian theory of polymorphous perversity, the kind of sexuality that a child has that is completely non-genital, and it's not focused, and it's just in everything. It's a sort of a suffusing sexuality, or sensuality almost. Even old Norman had some trouble when it came to try and figure out how the sort of Dionysian consciousness would function in a society where you had to walk down the street and cross the road and not get hit by a car, you know? I mean, how does that sort of all-enveloping sexuality work when you're just walking down the street? It's tricky.
I'm hungry for love. I'm hungry for love.
What they've seemed to embody and to dramatize is a horror of physicality, a great fear of repressed forces, a recurrent sexual disgust that emerges in his films again and again, a dread of active, aggressive, assertive women, as in, for example, Rabid.
You're so warm.
Look, I better...
Hold me. I'm dying of the cold. Oh, God, that's just
Look, you don't even know where you are, do you?
Oh, God.
Look, this is really weird. Are you sure you know what you're... Hey, I think I cut myself.
I find what he says about his films very confusing, because it never quite seems to jive with the films that I've seen, with what the films actually seem to be doing.
If what he says doesn't gel with the work, I mean, it's what he needs to get to the final product. Whatever he says doesn't matter. It's the work. It's the work that says it, really. But when I've spoken to him, he does seem to know that he's going for that juggler. He does seem to know that he's going for that part of the brain that doesn't want to be touched or think about those things. He has that. He has that. He does speak a great deal about Marshall McLuhan and things I don't understand. I have no idea what he's really talking about. But whatever he needs to get him to that position, I think is fine.
I notice that my characters talk about the flesh undergoing revolution at times, and I see that, and I think, well, yeah, I guess that's really what it is. It's sort of the independence of the body relative to the mind, and the difficulty of the mind, the difficulty of the mind accepting what that revolution might entail.
Our friend has very strange eyes. I should think his vision of the world is very distorted. And I'm pretty certain he sees things only in black and white, no colors. The upper lip is cleft. steel hair lip, but the pouch is not. And the tongue is too thick and inflexible for proper speech. There's an external deformity. I mean, apart from the lack of sexual organs. It's extremely subtle, extremely provocative.
Has no navel, no what? No belly button. The thing has no belly button.
That's right. And that means this creature has never really been born. At least not the way human beings are born. Jesus.
I don't think that the flesh is necessarily treacherous, evil, bad. It is cantankerous and it is independent, and I think the idea of independence is the key. I mean, it really is like colonialism, you know, that the colonies suddenly decide that they can exist and should exist on their own, with their own personality, and should detach from the control of the mother country.
Wouldn't this look impressive in court?
Hmm?
You like it? I do. That's Raglan. That's psychoplasmics. It's called lymphosarcoma. And it's spreading. It's a form of cancer of the lymphatic system. Raglan encouraged my body to revolt against me. And it did. Now, I have a small revolution on my hands, and I'm not putting it down very successfully. Psychoplasmics can cause cancer. Catchy, huh?
It perhaps means that we are just beginning a very important phase of our evolution, which would be primarily, I still think, a physical one. And I suspect that the way that we are changing the earth, which seems very destructive to us right now, might be very much involved in I don't think natural selection, as Darwin understood it, is really at work anymore as far as human evolution is concerned. I think something more along the lines of nuclear disaster is perhaps a natural part of our evolution. It's maybe a strange philosophy, I'm not sure. But my instinct seems to suggest that we were meant to tamper with everything, and have done, and that is going to reflect back and change us.
I've always found his films extremely unpleasant, distasteful, and kind of negative, totally negative. I certainly don't regard them as representing any of the progressive potential of the genre at all. I would make an exception of the Dead Zone there, which for me is, I was amazed when I saw the Dead Zone. It seemed a complete change for Cronenberg, and a really healthy one.
Hey, thanks very much for coming. Good.
Do it, General. You're insane. I won't. Do it! Put your hand on the scanning screen and you'll go down in history with me.
As what? The world's greatest mass murderers?
You cowardly bastard! You're not the voice of the people. I am the voice of the people. The people speak through me, not you. Now you put your goddamn hand on that scanning screen, or I'll hack it off and put it on for you. Do it!
May God forgive me.
Congratulations, General.
Complete the sequence, Mr. President.
My destiny.
This is not necessary, Mr. President. We have a diplomatic solution.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Secretary, the missiles are flying. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
You okay, Greg? Greg! Our driver. Well,
I think it's a built-in need that we rehearse the difficult things of life, so that when they come, we're prepared for them, prepared to deal with them, handle them. They don't come as a complete surprise and don't overwhelm us. And certainly aging and death are two of those things. And I think that one of the ways that modern man does that is through his art. Actually, has always done it through his art, man has. But now, the cinema being a recent art, that is one of the ways that we can do that, is that we confront things and deal with things in a relatively safe context, which is to say the cinema.
Don't let me see you're frightened. So, leave. Hurry, Hannah.
Please! Not till I know.
Now.
That film is just a film, isn't it? Horrible.
It's really my own need to do that, and to do it in a sort of a public way that I think leads automatically to an audience being involved in that too. And I think, yeah, an audience wants that.
I think they're enjoying and to a great extent identifying with the eruption of the monster and the whole subversion of the dominant culture. At the same time, because of this continual ambivalence, also presumably identifying with the destruction of the monster at the end, the restoration of so-called normality. Although that normality is inevitably presented as kind of empty, uninteresting, dull.
They need it for two reasons. The first thing is that cathartic thing. It's a way of, you know, lancing a boil a little bit and letting off what I'd call laudable pus, getting rid of some of the infection. Now, there are a lot of people who work in this genre who will say that, and they'll say that's the end of it, because basically it's a question of justification.
And now, here it is, the Rita King Show. And this afternoon, Rita's guests are Max Friend, controversial president of Channel 83, radio personality Nikki Brand, and media prophet Professor Brian Oblivion. Take it away, Rena.
Max Wren, your television station offers its viewers everything from softcore pornography to hardcore violence. Don't you feel such shows contribute to a social climate of violence and sexual malaise? And do you care?
Certainly I care. I care enough, in fact, to give my viewers a harmless outlet for their fantasies and their frustrations. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a socially positive act.
You say to yourself, all right, catharsis, the audience is getting rid of something. But I will not stop there, because morally I'm very uncomfortable with what I do. And if I ever stop being uncomfortable with what I do, I'm afraid that I'm going to become a panderer rather than an artist. I think that for every 5 or 10 members of your audience, whatever the figure would be, that is getting rid of something as a result of what you're doing, there are 2 or 3 that are taking something in that they need. And what they're taking in is violence, aggression, kind of sadism by proxy, just sort of a wallow in nastiness. Now, whether or not that makes things worse, whether or not that also takes the pressure off for them, is something that's been debated long before and will go on long after, you know, this interview is history and we're all dust in the wind.
Dr. Gentry, do you honestly feel that this is a time for martial law?
I don't think there is any question that martial law is needed in the city of Montreal at this point in time. It's a necessity. It's already been established that the victims of the disease, and it is not rabies, though it may be related to the rabies virus, the victims of the disease are beyond medical help once it has established itself to the degree of inducing violent behavior.
What you're saying then, sir, that is, if these people have contracted the disease, that there is...
I am saying is very simple, and it may not be very palatable for your viewers. Shooting down the victims is as good a way of handling them as we have got. If we lock them up, they eventually go into a coma and die shortly afterwards.
throughout the 70s, one got a recurrence of what I would call the apocalyptic horror film, which either is concerned with the end of the culture in some quite, possibly even the end of the world in some fairly explicit way, or at least is about the impossibility of reaffirming anything at the end within the status quo, within the culture as it exists. And one is left either to, I suppose, to respond with a kind of despair or hopelessness, or to begin looking beyond the culture for other structures, other forms of social, sexual organization. Dawn of the Dead, I think, is all about that. It's about people who are, zombies, the monsters, representing simply the sort of dead remnants of the culture, consumer capitalism at its most extreme and ridiculous. It ends virtually with the whole world overwhelmed by the zombies by implication, but it still seems one of the most positive and optimistic of all horror films. The closer it comes to producing the monster as the real hero, the center of sympathy, the more progressive the film.
I think Robin Wood is right that the horror genre is basically subversive, but I really don't think he understands how it is. And that's why he thinks that my films are reactionary and which, in a political sense, really means very simply that it upholds the status quo. I think that horror films are subversive because they appeal to a human response which is beyond politics and beyond society. The films show the destruction of the status quo, but he feels that my films are mourn the loss of the status quo. But you see, I think that's a very superficial level that the films work on, and I don't think they all work on that level anyway. I think that in a visceral level, which is where horror films really work, they're thrilling at the same time. They're exhilarating. It's scary, as such things are, but also exhilarating and liberating. And I thought that was obvious. But I do confess that there is an ambivalence on my part when it comes to preaching subversion, because I'm aware that along with revolution of any kind comes destruction, as a matter of course. And when you have children, and you become very protective, you become defensive. I can't say that I would glory in the streets running blood, anywhere. You tear down something that's ugly and repressive, and you create something that's even more ugly and repressive. But it doesn't mean that you have to stop. It's necessary to continue to explore and to attempt these things. I mean, that's a given of human existence. I mean, we just don't stop. We never stop.
I think the British have really written the best work on these films. In America, they don't tend to take them that seriously, unless it's Hitchcock. And if you look at Hitchcock, it's just interesting. For example, the Academy with Hitchcock. He was only nominated 3 times, once for Lifeboat, once for Psycho, and I think the other time for Rebecca, I'm not sure. But I don't think he's ever won. He never won an award. It's very interesting, very interesting. And now he's considered, it's the top of technique, the height of it, the best. And I don't think they'll ever take it seriously.
I remember with The Brood trying to get distribution from some people like Universal, and they were just not, it was a low-budget horror film. They were not the slightest bit interested. And it wasn't long after that that Halloween and Friday the 13th made them take a second look. It was a kind of an elitist question, really. They just thought these films were beneath them. They were major studios. They were not interested in being involved in those kind of films. At first, they had to learn to like them because of the money involved. You could make a film that was not very expensive and make a lot of money. And I think gradually their aesthetic sense has changed to the point where they can understand that some of those films can be quite good films. They have nothing to be ashamed of distributing those films.
I mean, Cronenberg is certainly a filmmaker of extreme integrity and seriousness. And filmmakers of integrity and seriousness are certainly having great trouble surviving in the present climate.
Now, enjoy delicious...
Any person who is a control freak, any person who wants control, must find video the most threatening technological development ever, because there's freedom to record, to change, to edit, to exchange tapes. The technology of film, even 8mm film, is too clumsy, but cassette, video cassette is really is freedom of the image, and it doesn't surprise me at all that focus should shift from the cinema, which now would seem relatively safe and controlled compared with what can happen in videotape. You often find the belief that an image can kill. I mean, literally. I mean, it's almost like scanners. You know, thoughts can kill, images can kill. So the very suggestion of let's say, sadomasochism in a film will somehow trigger off these masses of psychotics out there to do things that they would never have done unless they've been exposed to this image.
The idea would be to remain true to yourself when you're making the picture, to remain true to what you feel is the reason you wanted to make the film. Simple. It's not easy to make a picture. You don't, you know, it's not like I don't get paid like I don't call myself a director. A director for me is a person who, you know, gets a property and somehow shows up on the set and actually shows up real early, like I've always said this, like 6:30, sometimes 7, and you get there and you have an actor, an actress, or whatever, and you got to convince them to come out of the trailer to do a scene, and it's very, very hard. And who the hell wants to do that? There's no amount of money in the world that can pay you. It's going to make you happy in that situation. You've got to believe in what you're doing. And if you believe in what you're doing, you know that I have the confidence in myself, at least at that point, to say, I think it's worth saying. And I think it's honest. And what the effects are.
I was just sitting on the porch one day and I got thinking about cannibalism, because that's what guys like me do, you know, and I thought to myself, what if a guy washed up on a rocky island or something? How much of himself could he eat? Auto-cannibalism. And I just started to laugh. The idea was so beautiful. It was just so totally perfect in its repulsiveness. It was round and smooth and just utterly gross with no redeeming social merit. And I knew that I didn't have the talent to do it justice, but I knew that I must try. So there was this elderly doctor who lived next door, and he regarded me with some suspicion anyway, because the year before I'd asked him if it would be possible for a man to swallow a cat under the right circumstances.
The very existence of imagination means that you can posit an existence different from the one you're living. And if you are trying to create a repressive society in which people will submit to what exists now and to whatever you give them, then the very fact of being able to imagine something else, not necessarily better, just different, is a threat. So even on that very simple and straightforward level, imagination is dangerous. And if you accept, at least to some extent, the Freudian dictum that civilization is repression, then imagination and an unrepressed creativity is dangerous to civilization.
And he starts with his toes and works up to his feet, you know. It's very funny. I can't, it sounds sick, and it is sick, but it was, at the same time, there was something about it that was very funny.
It doesn't hurt.
But I think the whole idea of horror coming from within you and in your body in particular, I think that that's something that I have contributed certainly to the modern strain of the genre.
the themes have remained, I think, consistent. And I think, in a funny way, it's like it's such an obvious stamp. It's such an obvious stamp of such an original talent that it's almost... It's like a guy doing it's like one painter doing a self-portrait over and over again. I believe, I was beginning to say this before, but I believe the best description of this may be, I don't know who said this, but I've forgotten who said it, but it reminds you of the paintings of Francis Bacon. That sort of impact. I think that's the most eloquent way of putting it.
I would love for there to be a strain of filmmaking. I say strain, I suppose we're talking about virus again. A strain of viral filmmaking that was recognizably mine. In the same way that we can say, I suddenly felt that I was in a Fellini film, or that was a very Fellini-esque image or moment. It would be, to me, it would be part of what I have to do to become a truly rounded and integrated filmmaker, that I should be able to create an ambience or a tone or an imagery in my films that was recognizably my own and that had sprung from me and no one else. I would like that very much.
Cronenberg is 20th century, late 20th century. You know, Cronenberg is something that we unfortunately have no control over. What I mean by that is we have no control over what seems to be the imminent destruction of ourselves. So that is what's so clear about his work. That's what's so frightening, what's upsetting. I don't even sometimes, I don't even want to see them sometimes when they come out, those pictures, Cronenberg's. But I'll get there, and you know, it's an experience cathartic for me to go through.
Any artist is trying to take control of life by organizing it and shaping it and recreating it, because he knows very well that the real version of it is beyond his control.
All right, quiet, please.
There's a reflection right over her face from this angle right now. As an artist, one is not a citizen of a society. As an artist, one is bound to explore every aspect of human experience. The darkest corners, not necessarily, but if that is where one is led, that's where one must go. And it therefore means that you cannot worry about what the structure of your own particular segment of society considers to be good behavior, bad behavior, good exploration, bad exploration. You have to, therefore, an artist is not a citizen. At the time that he's being an artist, he is not a citizen. He does not have the social responsibility of a citizen. He has, in fact, I believe, no social responsibility whatsoever.